Dr. Sahir Irfan was tired, and it was late. Another experiment would have to be tossed out with yet another failed hypothesis, another failed approach. He knew he was not the only researcher feeling frustrated. His colleagues here at the University of California, San Francisco, were equally discouraged. Not a single approach anyone had tried in the last several months seemed to have legs. Even the university administrators were beginning to apply pressure. The federal government was paying for most of this research into the regeneration and repair of nerve tissue. Their latest war was producing too many casualties and too few profits for the investors. The public was clamoring for some heads on a platter, and it was election season. The Board of Regents was applying their own pressure as well. Enrollment was down in state institutions. People were getting wise to their manipulation of data and academic fraud as they served the true masters, not the tax cows. Money was tight everywhere as talent drained away from the state institutions of higher learning and into private ventures. The feds were dangling huge grants in front of both public and private research centers to anyone who could come up with a viable process for repairing extensive damage to injured nerve and brain cells. There was never any tacit admission of responsibility by either side, if there were distinct sides these days, but something different had appeared in the war zone, with the potential to spread far beyond. A new and more persistent form of flesh-eating bacteria had arisen, with an acute taste for nerve tissue. Fort Detrick and the CDC remained silent, as always. The Turks and Israelis denied all knowledge, as did the British government. Dr. Irfan knew this was par for the course. He had come to the United States with his parents at the age of 9 after gaining a lucky release from a Lebanese refugee camp with visas for the U.S. As an idealistic young man, he longed to relieve the suffering of others. To this day, he had nightmares about the war-torn Syria, the camps, and seeing what no young boy or man should ever see. He became a doctor and selflessly joined the U.S. Army to express his gratitude, repay loans, and honestly to treat the most traumatic of battlefield injuries. But he left the Army as soon as he was able. While there, he saw even more things that no person should ever see, but not in the kill zones. Even those private ventures, including the dominant pharmaceutical companies, were not having much success, despite their own too-big-to-fail subsidies. Dr. Irfan's daughter, Rima, was herself a researcher in neurological treatment at Thunderbird Inc., whose very name invoked visions of condemned patients rising from the ashes to regain their health and mobility. Her team had been researching similar treatments as her father since the crisis had escalated. Dr. Irfan looked at his young, eager assistant and postdoctoral fellow, Maria Ramirez, and said, "I'm so sorry, Maria, but we have failed again. We shall have to come in tomorrow morning with fresh eyes and fresh minds." You could see the look of disappointment in Maria's eyes. She was so very hopeful for this procedure. She put a brave face on and said, "Yes, Dr. Irfan, tomorrow is another day, and you know I am extremely dedicated to finding a solution." The experienced and much accomplished researcher closed his laptop and put away his written notes as he prepared to leave. He noticed Maria poring over her own notes and frantically scouring her computer files and databases. He knew that look of hope as it lit up her face. He smiled at her youthful exuberance as he made his way toward the door, anticipating the dreaded fitful sleep of failure. When he was halfway out the door, Maria came dashing, almost skipping, to catch him in time. Dr. Irfan, what about that culture we tried 6 weeks ago? Remember how the stem cells, microbes, and nerve cells meshed, almost like they were meant to do so?" "Yes, Maria, but those results were inconclusive as well, were they not?" The lead scientist was not so sure. now that his assistant looked so excited. Dr. Irfan stopped to truly think about it. He may have tossed those results aside too hastily. Maria, you may be onto something. The majority of the elements we are looking for were there. The cells reproduce rapidly like bacteria. There were no signs of rejection among them. In fact, they appear to thrive better together than any of them ever does in isolation. We will both get a good night's sleep and take a careful look again at the data in the morning, all right? Yes, Dr. Irfan, she said as she skipped back to her work area. She was grinning from ear to ear. This cheered up Irfan significantly. Perhaps he would get a decent night's rest after all, and so would his wife. His wife was well acquainted with how his work affected his sleep habits and hers. The next morning, Dr. Irfan came to the lab early, not being able to quell his own excitement. Not surprisingly, Dr. Ramirez was there ahead of him. She had retrieved some of the cells from cryogenic storage, kept there for just such an occasion. One never knows what could have been overlooked earlier. You couldn't wait for me, Maria? He said with a wry smile. She looked alarmed, but only for a brief moment, then laughed. You know me, Dr. Irfan. I'm all for the early bird getting that worm. Dr. Irfan could see that his colleague was already preparing additional cultures to give them some fodder for discussion. Later on, Ramirez called him over. Look, I've been watching the cells divide, and I know now that we missed something for sure. I've got as much magnification as this microscope will give me, and I've been recording video most of the morning. The senior researcher was not sure what he was looking for as he squinted over the eyepiece. Ramirez said, You won't see it that way, Dr. Irfan. What I've been noting is only in the video. Once I speed it up somewhat, I've got timestamps at the relevant stages of mitosis and meiosis. Let me project it for you. Maria watched Irfan as he stared at the cells projected on the whiteboard as they divided. He could recognize the human stem cells, one-celled microbes, and more mature human nerve cells ready for division. Then he saw something he had seen before in a video long ago. The video demonstrated how microbes, not even related, could meet and exchange genetic information. With high enough magnification, minute strands of DNA or RNA would leave the cell walls of one and enter the cell walls of another. He was seeing it again here. That's astonishing, Maria. They are exchanging DNA right as the cells are dividing and is intermingling with that of each new cell's DNA as it splits. Over the next week, the cultures were noted as being just as robust as before, if not more so. They were allowed to grow much longer than the first time with a changing supply of nutrients until just the right cocktail was prepared for their liking. Mostly they became coherent, tightly connected bodies or networks with the characteristics of the dominant nerve cells guiding their development. There were occasional splits from the main body, but this was ascribed to the expected degree of mutation that might arise. All were healthy and thriving. The day came when Dr. Irfan said, Dr. Ramirez, I believe it is time we take a few cultures and test their response to various stimuli. If this tissue is to act as a bridge or repair for ordinary nerve cells, then we need to know if it reacts identically or abnormally to our probes. Maria was so bright and cheerful these days, thought Dr. Irfan. This was probably the greatest event in her early career since having successfully defended her PhD thesis at Columbia. Carefully, she lowered the sharp-pointed electrode toward one side of the colony. She had already tried chemical, temperature, and various frequencies of light with varying intensity levels. While she did this with the video recording, Dr. Irfan said, You know, this is not far off from the work my daughter is doing over at Thunderbird. This is supposed to be a national crisis, and we are encouraged to collaborate where would normally be in competition. Should I give her a call? Maria grudgingly agreed. She was still at the beginning of her career, and needed to make a name for herself. But she could offer no excuses for her mentor to not contact his daughter, Rima. Dr. Irfan was already contemplating how he might write up this research for publication, or at least an extension of his grant. If this was not the solution to the problem at hand, it had to be a significant step forward in solving the puzzle. He felt for all the new and long-suffering trauma victims, those already paralyzed as well as those facing that prospect for the first time. As the research progressed, it became time to test responses to electrical stimuli, the language of nerve cells. Dr. Irfan noticed, Maria, what is that blood spot on your glove there? Did you injure yourself? You must be more careful, I beg you. Sahir, Maria soothed, since she had begun addressing him by his first name. It's nothing really. I just poked myself with one of those sharp probes we've been using. It will be fine. Say, you know these cells are growing like weeds. Do you really think we need to keep so many? Dr. Ramirez was lowering the pointed and hazardous electrical probe into the petri dish, and as she did so, he noticed something unexpected. Where the mass should have moved away from the probe, this one moved toward the probe and surrounded it. Maria was mesmerized as they climbed up the steel probe toward the plastic handle. It happened so quickly that she dropped the electrode and backed away. As the weeks and the research progressed, Dr. Irfan and Dr. Ramirez began collaborating with his daughter, Dr. Rima Irfan, at Thunderbird Inc. Quite a few emails and videos had been traded between father and daughter. Finally, Drs. Irfan and Ramirez made the trip over to Santa Clara to Thunderbird Laboratories, where similar cultures and results had been achieved. Dr. Ramirez said, well, don't you two feel it is time to put this to the ultimate test? I mean, we have no shortage of volunteers, and the administration is fast-tracking everything. We shouldn't have any problems running limited clinical trials. Rima was still apprehensive, but she did not want to disappoint her father. She could see how animated he was. I suppose not, she said. Everything points toward us putting our money where our mouths are. We already have the backbone of a proposal at the ready, since much of it is boilerplate with us. Her father noticed that his daughter had a bandage on her wrist and inquired about it. Oh, it's nothing, Papa. I broke one of the culture dishes in the lab and took a few minor cuts. Looks worse than it is. Dr. Irfan wasn't so sure. Rima, dear, perhaps you should have that looked at. How long ago did you cut yourself? His daughter replied, it has been nearly a week. I guess I should not be needing this bandage, but it was not healing properly. Rima, are you feeling all right? You look a little pale now that I can see you better in this direct light, and you seem a little sluggish, said Zahir. Must be from trying to keep up with. We also have these army types breathing down our necks, wondering when they could get something into the military hospitals. It wears on a person. Later, in Rima's laboratory, Dr. Irfan noticed that his daughter seemed extremely protective of the cultures, though they were overflowing their storage areas. He had noticed the same behavior in his assistant, Dr. Ramirez, but until he observed it here, nothing unusual had registered. Sergeant Mortensen had sustained both acute damage to the sciatic nerve of his right leg and to his spinal cord near the waist. He knew it was touch and go, but volunteered for the experimental grafts of this newly developed tissue. He was feeling better than he had in months. Dr. Sahir Irfan was examining the soldier while casually asking him questions. I see that you are doing much better these days and that the physical therapy seems to be building up your muscles and coordination. Are there any other effects you can mention that may help us? The sergeant was not accustomed to talking about himself, but he gave it a try. I feel really great, Doc. I just don't know how to describe it. I feel more confident somehow, like I've got a new friend helping me, not just you, but something I cannot describe. Like not only am I healing, but that I have been enhanced somehow. Dr. Irfan did not know how to respond to this. Well, Sergeant, can you at least try to elaborate? The soldier thought for a moment, then said, I just feel great. I can walk again. I can feel my legs again. And I have a new sense of purpose, such that I want everyone to feel as good as I do. Hey, nurse, be careful with that stuff, all right? A nurse was administering another dose of the treatment to a private a few beds down and nearly dropped the syringe. Dr. Irfan was alarmed at the near violent reaction of the sergeant he was examining. He said, Take it easy there, son. She might be having a bad morning, is all. The young man glared at him, then calmed down and smiled. You're right, Doc. Don't mind me. I'm still a bit edgy. Dr. Irfan was puzzled over the soldier's behavior, yet it struck him that both his daughter and his co-worker were equally protective when it came to handling the microbes used for treatment. Both had begged and borrowed extra lab space to store their growing collection of cultures, which normally would be disposed of as a biohazard. Both are increasingly eager to expand the number of patients in the trials. They behaved as if they were possessed at times in their evangelism of this treatment, suggesting that it be approved for testing with a number of other conditions, such as multiple sclerosis. Both seemed to exhibit manic states that were more intense and longer lasting than he'd witnessed in the past. The two talented researchers had always been driven to success, but it was getting out of hand. The Army and the administration were thrilled with results that had been achieved thus far. Before long, all of them would be taking credit for what Doctors Irfan and Ramirez had created. The administration was ready to fast track the fast tracking. In fact, the brass, braid, and ribbons were getting thicker each week in the wards where the military patients were being cared for. There were a couple of colonels, however, who were frequent visitors, he had noticed. Sahir made a mental note to find out why those two were more prevalent than the others, who paraded through each week. He also knew he had to take it upon himself to investigate some disturbing effects of this treatment that no one else wished to discuss, least of all Maria and Rima. It was becoming increasingly difficult to speak with them about anything other than expanding the trials. The army, the politicians, other doctors all seemed to be on their side. Dr. Irfan was the odd man out. One evening, before leaving the laboratory, Dr. Irfan walked by Maria's laptop. He stopped dead in his tracks as he stared at her computer screen. There was a fresh, mostly blank document open on the display. On it were the words, quote, We are out, we are free, we are walking, we are talking, we are seeing, tasting, and smelling, unquote. Sahir did not know what to make of this, but it sent a cold chill up his spine. Maria was supposed to be working on the next draft of a paper they were submitting for a conference in Los Angeles in a couple of months. This, he did not know what this was. Tomorrow, he would begin to restore order to his own laboratory, or at the very least, Zahir felt this would be a symbolic way to regain control over the jumbled thoughts he had been experiencing lately. He was worried about his daughter, about Maria, and about his patients. The next day, when Dr. Irfan came in, he did not see Maria, who usually was there at least an hour before him. She had left a note explaining that she was at the VA hospital checking up on some of her patients. She had been spending more time there than he thought would have been necessary. He thought that she was unusually chummy with the soldiers, as was his daughter. It wasn't a case of either being especially attracted to these injured but otherwise fit and handsome men. There was something else they shared with their patients. They seemed to have a camaraderie that went beyond either the doctor-patient relationship or any sexual attraction. He pondered this as he placed some calls to various contacts of his. His investigation had to be handled carefully, and it was probably best Dr. Ramirez was not around. After several failed attempts, he managed to find an old friend willing to be more candid with him. Dr. Gregory Prescott had known Sahir for many years, ever since they had been roommates in medical school. He too was seeing patients involved in the clinical trials. Who are those two army colonels with all the salad on their chests? Right, I know just who you're talking about. I call them Mutt and Jeff, humorless sods. I believe that their sole mission is to keep circulating among the hospitals, checking on the patients and speaking with the staff who take care of them most directly. Dr. Irfan was relieved to hear someone finally speak frankly with him, someone he trusted. But where do they come from? What are they after each week, week after week? Dr. Prescott became more serious. That is just what I've been looking into myself. I have it on good authority that they are both from Fort Detrick, where they supposedly stopped doing research into biological warfare. My sources tell me that it never stopped. Rather, they transferred the bulk of the operations elsewhere under another program name, like how Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, became the Ballistic Missile Defense Initiative, BMDO, but you did not hear that from me. Irfan became more disturbed by the minute and sensed that his friend was nervous, acting fearful. Greg, have you noticed the people dealing directly with this treatment, as well as the patients, behaving oddly? Dr. Prescott paused. Sahir, I have seen it, and that is the thing that has alarmed me the most. Irfan pressed. Be calm, just tell me what you have witnessed, and we'll compare notes, all right? Take your time. Sahir's old friend, Dr. Gregory Prescott, proceeded slowly. At the moment, we are dealing primarily with military personnel, as are you. Well, the wards here have become militarized, though this is a civilian, not a VA facility. There are guards in the laboratories and storage areas where the cultures are maintained. Our own civilian workers are being issued passes. You asked about odd behavior. Well, this is a major symptom. This protectiveness of the cultures and the way that the patients and many caregivers carry on like there is some wonderful private joke between them. At that moment, Dr. Irfan looked up to see his postdoc looming in his doorway. And just who the hell are you talking to now, Sahir? Barked his normally happy-go-lucky, one-time skipping assistant. Dr. Prescott heard the distinctive clunk as his friend's communicator hit the floor along with the high decibel exchange in Irfan's office, miles away. And what has been going on in the storage area? Where are my cultures? God damn it. Dr. Irfan tried to regain his composure with the shock of his unrecognizable assistant, whose face was now red as a beet. My research laboratory was becoming unruly and disorganized, doing nothing but caring for those cultures. Most of those should have been incinerated months ago. They're a biological hazard just waiting to happen. I came in early this morning and took those we no longer needed to the waste facility. Dr. Ramirez shouted, Biological hazard? Incineration? Waste facilities? What kind of monster are you, Dr. Irfan? We've been watching you, Sahir. What will you do with me when I am no longer useful to you, eh? Will you have me hauled off as you would your garbage or compost? Then, just as unexpectedly as she appeared, she burst into tears and ran out of the laboratory. He heard her wailing and crying echoing in the halls as she left the building. Looking outside, he saw her crossing the quad to collapse under a large live oak, curled up in a ball and sobbing out of control. He heard his name being called. Sahir, Sahir, are you there? Is everything all right? He had forgotten his conversation with Greg, who was still on the line in San Jose. No, no, everything is not all right. Everything is upside down. Now I'm truly afraid for Rima. She is behaving just like Maria has, and I'm scared as hell for her. What am I going to do? Dr. Prescott had snapped himself free from his own concerns now that he realized he was not alone. He had not been seeing things that were not there. He tried to console his friend. Sahir, I'm in this thing with you. I've known Rima since she was a baby. We've got to move smart, but we've got to move fast before this thing gets even worse than it is. Hearing the calming words of his friend bolstered Dr. Irfan, and he replied, Yes, you are right. We have to rely on our own training and critical thinking skills. But the Army and the government really want this, and that's no joke. I will text you soon, but I need to check on Rima first. He debated calling his wife, but did not wish to do so until it was unavoidable. He had to focus completely on Rima and the wider dangers. He would let ignorance be bliss for his wife a little while longer. If she was angry with him later, so be it. For now, he had to get out of the building without drawing attention. With Maria's dramatic exit, that would not be easy. First things first, dispose of the rest of the cultures, but that would draw more scrutiny. He did not know who was watching and who was oblivious. Dr. Irfan thought, what I'll do is neutralize the cultures where they are. No one will discover it for some time, and I could slip out of the building. He went to the pharmaceutical storage pantry and gathered several vials of assorted antibiotics, along with syringes. The microbe slash nerve slash stem cell hybrids were cultured in large, thick-walled plastic containers. The demand had been growing, and this was the best way to scale up. One by one, he pushed the large needles through the walls, injecting antibiotics. This would work for the cultures, but who knew how to treat those whose own nerve cells had been altered, augmented, or circumvented by this miracle cure? In the meantime, Sahir sent his daughter an innocuously worded text to see if she would meet him. He hoped that she had not been tipped off by Maria already. Getting out of the building was another issue. With so many military personnel about, he suspected many were there for clandestine surveillance duty. Already, some of the higher brass with long-standing nerve damage were getting elective surgery to correct decades-old ailments. Even select politicians were getting in on the act, no doubt to summon more widespread acceptance of the poorly understood treatment. Dr. Irfan then sent instructions to his hover. Pull up near the delivery entrance of the building in precisely 10 minutes. With luck, he could make his way downstairs and slip out unnoticed. Rima had returned his text, sounding a bit annoyed, but said she could meet him at 8 p.m. at the fish market for dinner. He was busy and the message was short. Once again, Sahir hoped Maria had not contacted her. He felt for Maria too, but had to prioritize. He texted Dr. Prescott, I'm meeting Rima for dinner at the fish market and might need your help. I don't know exactly how, but maybe the two of us together can convince her that she is in trouble. He concealed his communicator from other workers in the lab while he did this. Prescott replied, I'll meet you at the restaurant, but we should show up maybe 45 minutes beforehand to practice our good cop, bad cop routine. We also do not know who is watching or monitoring our movements. Besides, they have a bar there, and today I'll need a stiff drink by that time. Thank you, my friend, said Dr. Irfan. I'm truly blessed to have your help and steady nerves right now. Gathering as many documents, memory backups, and other records of their research as he could, he filled his large leather bag before leaving the lab. His hover was waiting there on time, and he got away. As the conveyance moved upward to find a hover lane with less traffic, Dr. Irfan made his way toward Silicon Valley. or as it was called now, Cubit Valley. Along the way, he contemplated with renewed awareness the ubiquitous surveillance drones that had become part of their everyday lives. Since the vehicle was doing the driving, this gave Sahir the opportunity to go through the research materials he had hastily shoved into his bag. He said aloud to himself, I need to be able to get this information to the public in a convincing way, but not enough for anyone to recreate this monstrosity. And I need sufficient ammunition against the powers that be to protect myself, my family, Dr. Prescott, and Dr. Ramirez. He uploaded his drives to the vehicle's own computer system. He was glad to have opted for the added memory, though he had no idea at the time what he would ever use it for. Simultaneously, he copied everything he had to several cloud servers through Starlink. This evidence would be in data centers scattered across the planet by the time he got to San Jose. Arriving in the multi-level parking area of the fish market, Zahir texted his friend, who flashed his lights. Dr. Irfan found a spot not too distant to attract attention, parked his hover, and made his way to his friend's vehicle. Greg, once again, I'm so glad you came. If you don't mind, I'm going to send my hover to a parking area I have reserved for trips to the valley. 2 known vehicles makes us twice as noticeable. Dr. Prescott said, right, I'm going to need that drink pretty quick here if we're going to pull this one off. Sahir knew his friend was only trying to lighten things up, as usual, but he wanted to get down to business. Ignoring this, Dr. Irfan said, how do we convince Rima that she needs to be examined? We need a biopsy to find out what is going on with her nervous system. If we are lucky, this tissue does not metastasize and we could tackle it more easily. If we are really fortunate, we can neutralize the negative effects while maintaining the rejuvenating mechanism. Entering the fish market, they found Rima already waiting for them, though she too was early. She was not alone. She was accompanied by a man in a dark suit, along with one of the Fort Detrick colonels. Prescott and Irfan were shaken, but did not let on or show any fear. Rima said, I had our reservation moved up, Papa, and I invited some friends of mine. I hope you don't mind. Hello, Uncle Greg. Nice to see you again. It has been a while. The 2 former med school roommates and colleagues were silent. They followed Rima and the 2 government goons to the reserved table. After ordering drinks and appetizers, they paused for the waiter to leave before Rima opened. Papa, you know just how busy I am these days. I hope that the reason you wish to see me is very important. Oh, by the way, this is Colonel Ty, and my other escort here is Vincent Chatsworth. He's with Homeland Security. They are very interested in our work. Prescott had regained his composure somewhat. I had no doubt that it would be. Colonel Ty spoke. Dr. Irfan, Dr. Prescott, we of the Army are very grateful for your work in aiding the recovery of so many of our brave young fighting men. Mr. Chatsworth here would concur. However, we feel that this project has gone far beyond your initial contributions. To that end, we feel that your valiant efforts in this crisis are deserving of a substantial reward. You can both retire, travel, and play golf to your heart's content. The only caveat is that we have your research materials to vastly scale up this miracle cure of yours. Your daughter Rima will also be taken care of nicely, though she has expressed her desire to continue your work in bringing this treatment to as many as possible. Dr. Irfan was truly rattled to the core, but could see this carrot and stick approach for what it was. Only the love of his daughter gave him the strength to speak. Gentlemen, let me tell you how this is going to turn out. First, my daughter Rima is going to be remanded to my personal care. If it takes the rest of my life, I'm going to find a cure for this condition, transformation, or possession, whatever it is, so that she may have her life back. She does not belong to you. She does not belong to this hybrid entity we have created. She belongs first and foremost to herself. I do not know if one or both of you have taken this treatment, are under their spell, or believe that you are some kind of super patriots for your efforts to keep this horror alive. I'm telling you now that this is going to end, and I'm going to end it. I will work for the rest of my life in an effort to isolate the positive effects, but I, with my family, will be left unmolested, along with Dr. Ramirez, Dr. Prescott, and his family. The government is going to shut this all down, move the patients and infected caregivers into isolation, where we can watch them and treat them. I am in possession of the most critical elements of this research, and I do not believe any of your paid for scientists will get close to reproducing it for several decades without my help. I say now that no aid from me will be forthcoming. I have enough information to bury this whole program alongside many of your careers. I may still choose to expose this at any time. Dr. Prescott took a sip of his whiskey sour, then said, "Gentlemen, with business out of the way, I highly recommend the cioppino. Make sure you go easy on the bread, as it is very filling." The colonel and the government spook then excused themselves and walked out of the front door. Rima began to cry and moved to her father's side of the table, where he hugged her tightly for the remainder of their meal.